Davis. The guest is Mr. RPickard, and he is a professor at Tennessee State University, and the topic is Congressman RFulton from 1962 to 1972. And of course, Professor Pickard, let's see if we can pick up with Congressman Fulton. And why don't you give us a little background information in reference to him, how he became a congressman and that kind of information.
Okay. Congressman Fulton was a local boy. He grew up here off Gallatin Road there in East Nashville. And he was a popular kid, classic popular kid. He was president of his senior class in high school at East High School. He was on the football team, very good football player. And this was a time when football, local sports like that, high school sports, was very important. There was no professional sports at the time. And very handsome young man, always, still today, a very handsome man, blessed with good looks. He was very close to his brother, Lyle Fulton, for whom the bridge over here is named, and for whom his son is named. And he and Lyle delivered papers in East Nashville there, and they also worked with George Barrett, who would play an important part in Fulton's career and in the history of Nashville. And after he graduated in 1945, just a few months before the Japanese surrender, and he enlisted in the Navy. On December of that year, he married his high school sweetheart, Jewel Simpson. After a year in the Navy, he was discharged honorably. He turned down the GI Bill to go to take a football scholarship to UT. He did not graduate. He spent a year there and decided to come home. He had a child and probably another one on the way by the time he had 5 children. And he came back and went into business with his brother Lyle. They had, I think, more than one store, maybe 2, 3 stores in East Nashville. One at first, variety store, you know, kind of like, you know, the dollar store or something like that, like we'd have today. And he was also a realtor. And his brother was asked by Governor Frank Clement in 1954 to run for the state senate. Now, at that time, the state senators and state representatives were elected at large in Davidson County. This was before the Baker versus Carr decision. And also, the legislature was really under the thumb of the governor. The governor told them what to do, pretty much. Governor Clement asked Lyle to run. Lyle was 31 years old at the time. He ran. He won the Democratic nomination, which, of course, meant that he would be elected in this county. And, but then he, unfortunately, he died of cancer. Very tragic, and very tragic for Nashville. John Sigenthaler, whom I interviewed for this and some other research, and who's been to my, as you know, has been to my class several times, told me that, or he described Lyle as Lincoln-esque. So he might have been a great figure. In any case, Governor Clement asked Mr. Fulton to run, and the county court would decide who would fill that seat. And the problem was he was only 27 years old at the time. The Constitution requires it to be 30 to be in the Senate. And according to Fulton, and I haven't followed that directly, but I assume this, because of the circumstances, to be true, Clement told him there are ways of getting around this, and there weren't. He got to the Senate and was not seated, and caused controversy. Anyway, 2 years later, he ran for Congress. Now, the 5th District's congressman from 1940 to 1956 was a former editor at the Tennessean named Jerry Percy Priest, who, for whom, you know, lots of things are named around town here. And he was a very good congressman. He was very much like most Middle Tennessee Democrats. He was a national rather than a regional Democrat, not a Dixiecrat, definitely. In fact, I found a letter from Strom Thurmond in his papers asking him to support the Dixiecrat Party in 1948, which he did not do. He was also a majority whip for a while, and then by 1956 was chair of a powerful committee, Public Works and Transportation. Fulton ran against him. He was only 29 years old at the time, and one of the things that he criticized Priest for doing was Priest did not sign something called the Southern Manifesto, which was a statement of principles by a Southern congressman opposing the Supreme Court's decision 2 years earlier and promising massive resistance to integration. Only a few Southern congressmen did not sign that, but interestingly, a majority of Tennessee's House delegation did not sign the manifesto. That included three Middle Tennessee Democrats, Joe Evans, Percy Priest, and Ross Bass, and the two Republicans representing the state at the time, Carol Reese, who was conservative Republican but very pro-civil rights, and Howard Baker Sr., father of the senator. And both of our senators, neither of our senators signed the Southern Manifesto. Lyndon Johnson of Texas was not asked to sign. He was majority leader, but these two senators, our two senators, refused to sign on principle. Fulton criticized him for that and said he would have signed. He talked about a lot of other issues too. He really didn't go off on a hardcore segregationist campaign, but he did have conservative support, including the banner, and Nashville very favorable to him. They'd be very unfavorable later. After he got beat 2-1, he ran 2 years later on a legislative ticket backed by organized labor for the state senate, and was elected to the state senate, and of course this time seated. At that time, again, the legislature under the domination of the governor had only met once every 2 years, and the governor was Buford Ellington, originally of Mississippi, described himself at the time an old-fashioned segregationist. But Fulton had the bug, and he ran for Congress in 1960. Now, Percy Priest had died in the fall of 1956. He had a heart attack on just days before the election. And the Democratic Executive Committee would decide who the nominee was and therefore the winner. So they met, and the county's political factions at the time, one headed by Beverly Briley, the other by Mayor Ben West, fought each other. And the eventual winner was the District Attorney General, Carlton Loesser, who was 64 years old at the time. According to George Barrett, he claimed to be a friend of organized labor, but wasn't. Barrett says that that Loesser was in fact discourteous to them. So organized labor backed Fulton in 1960. Interestingly, some of the black, there are several black political factions in town at the time, and they united behind Fulton. Now, one person who didn't understand this was Mansfield Douglas, the late Mansfield Douglas, whom I interviewed. One of the great public servants in Davidson County, I think, and he even thought he heard Fulton use the N-word on television once. So he confronted Fulton about this, and Fulton apparently gave him a satisfactory answer. He said, I was worried about I was embarrassed by the violence and opposition to school integration. So he had solid support from the black community after that.
Okay, and of course, let us take this second commercial break here, Professor Pickard, and then we'll pick up at that instance. And of course, we'll be back with our audience following this very short commercial break. We're talking to